The Battle of Camp Bastion was fought in Helmand Province, Afghanistan on the 14th to the 15th of September 2012. Bastion's location had been used by the Soviet Army in the 1980s, and more recently as a NATO Special Forces outpost. Therefore, the NATO main operating base's location in Helmand was already known to be A. strategic, and B. easy to defend. Construction began in 2005, and British commanders were so confident of its impregnability, they decided to call it Bastion. But Camp Bastion did get impregnated. On the evening of Friday, the 14th of September, 15 Taliban Special Forces soldiers wearing US military pattern uniforms, as seen here in a Taliban propaganda video released after the attack, launched their airfield raid from the valley running parallel to the NATO base. They used the cover of 600 metres of unsecured earthworks to reach Bastion's outer perimeter defences, as shown in these pasted-together photographs I took from Guard Tower 11, 7 days before the attack, on the 7th of September. Once at the perimeter, the well-practiced attackers cut a hole in the chain-link fence before entering the base, as demonstrated in this Taliban propaganda video. The exact fence breach point is recorded in the now declassified US investigation as being 250 metres south of Guard Tower 17. When interviewed after the raid, the one surviving Taliban attacker said they froze when a guard in Tower 17 had shone a torch towards them, but unseen by the guard in Tower 17, they waited a few minutes before continuing. This highlights one critical factor in the success of the attack. The British Tongan soldiers were not issued with night vision equipment, leaving them effectively blind on what was a moonless night with less than 2% natural illumination. It also shows the Tongan soldiers were incredibly alert and that they reacting to a sound 250 metres away, and incredibly brave given that shining a torch from a guard tower would provide a perfect aiming marker for any attackers. The guard in Tower 17 didn't react again, and from my experiences guarding Bastion's airfield that summer, I have a very strong inkling as to why. Our commanders appeared to have no concept that the Taliban would attempt an airfield raid. Every concern about security I raised that summer was dismissed with the same two reassurances. Don't worry so much, and don't worry, Mohammed controls this valley. There will be more on Mohammed later. Once inside the wire, the Taliban split into 3 groups. One group made their way to the US Marine Corps 3rd Air Wing hangars that housed 8 Harrier jump jets. That's where the battle began, just after 10 p.m. First there was an exchange of small arms fire, before the Harrier jets began exploding as the Taliban targeted them with rocket-propelled grenades. 6 Harriers were destroyed and 2 more were severely damaged. Those losses alone, within the first few minutes of the battle, were the US military's biggest combat loss of aircraft since the Tet Offensive in 1968 Vietnam. Those first shots alerted the US Marines in the Harrier jet hangar facility. Most were technicians and logistic clerks, people who quite rightly would never have expected to be in direct combat with the enemy. But they responded courageously, donning their body armour and moving towards the sound of the gunfire, led by their commanding officer Lieutenant Colonel Rebel. It was about 20 minutes since the first shots had been fired. A second team of Taliban attackers had moved towards the fuel storage depot, and they now used a rocket-propelled grenade to strike a fuel bladder full of aviation fuel. The resultant explosion caused a rolling fireball to form like a mushroom cloud, reaching hundreds of feet into the air. The third group of attackers had set up the fire base inside the cryogenics lab just across the road from the Harrier jets hangars. From that heavily fortified facility they began to raid the airfield with heavy machine gun fire. I was about 1.5 miles away, outside of my accommodation tent in the middle of the sprawling base. I'd heard what I thought was gunfire, although it was far enough away to sound more like popcorn popping. The junior officers I was with told me not to worry about it, saying it was likely just a training exercise, but I wasn't convinced. I climbed up onto a HESCO barrier to see if I could see anything, just in time to see the mushroom cloud fireball climbing into the night sky. I jumped down and ran to get my body armour, concerned there may be secondary attacks within the base. 5 minutes later, a TANO announcement alerted the whole camp to the ongoing attack. As ordered, we secured our own accommodation compound and then proceed to watch the glow of battle on the horizon. By now the British Quick Reaction Force had responded too. The attack had been contained and one by one the Taliban attackers were neutralised, until there was just the Taliban fire base left to deal with. That was done by an attack helicopter hovering above the airfield, invisible in the ink-black sky. The final salvo of 40mm cannon fire coming from that attack helicopter looked like a laser beam emerging from nowhere, raining death down on the remaining attackers with that characteristic sound, almost like blowing a raspberry. The entire battle had lasted about 3 or 4 hours, but clearing the battlefield continued throughout the night and into the next day. By about 10 a.m. on Saturday the battle damage assessment started to filter down to us. 2 U.S. Marines had been killed, Sergeant Atwell and Lieutenant Colonel Rabel. We were also told, unofficially, how the Taliban had got past the airfield guard towers. It was because the guards in the tower nearest the breach point didn't have any night vision equipment. The detail was spoken in hushed tones though, out of embarrassment and shame I think. It's a detail that was omitted from both the US and British investigation reports too, and I guess for the same reasons, embarrassment and shame. The closest battle damage to my accommodation were bullet holes in the vehicle workshops marked here, for reference. This is where the British Apache attack helicopters and Captain Wales, better known as Prince Harry, were based. So, although the Taliban's well-publicised intention to kill or capture Captain Wales was not achieved, he was certainly in the line of fire, and a lot closer than most to the battle. Seeing the news reports the next morning focusing on Harry was extremely disheartening for those of us that knew of the courageous acts of so many others that night, and the deaths of 2 US Marines, Sergeant Atwell and Lieutenant Colonel Rabel, both killed in action defending the base. Those first headlines broadcast within hours of the attack were just the first stage of an institutional cover-up of the criminal negligence of our commanders. Commanders more focused on profiteering and self-advancement than on those serving under them or on the mission. I intend to expose their criminal negligence to its full extent for 2 reasons. To ensure the truth is known to all, and 2, to ensure I've done everything possible to prevent such avoidable failings occurring again.